And please welcome to the stage the governor of the state of New York, Governor Kathy Hochul.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you very much. It is great to be here. Appreciate that. Great to be here with so many of my friends and allies from the legislature, the real champions of women's reproductive freedom that I've worked with for a number of years now, and our advocates, and certainly someone I'll be introducing with great fervor because she requires and deserves it. That is our Attorney General, Tish James. I've got to call you up in a couple minutes, but thank you for being here. Rochelle Rodney, the Director of Advocacy for the New York Birth Control Access Project. Rochelle, we appreciate you being Niharika Rao is here from the co-founder, the lead organizer of Reproductive Justice Collective. And we have some of our state senators and assembly members who've been proponents of finding any way we can to help create more access to reproductive rights and access to birth control. First of all, one of our bill sponsors, Senator Stavisky, has joined us. Senator Toby Ann Stavisky, thank you. Another one of our bill sponsors, Senator Cordell Clear, has joined us. Senator Clear. Assemblymember Amy Paulin, one of our bill sponsors, is again. Harvey Epstein, one of the enlightened men in the group. Thank you. One of our bill sponsors. Aaliyah Webb has joined us as well, one of our senators as well. And I want to just thank you. It's so great. So great to look out in a crowd like this and to see the passion, the people who have taken this issue to the streets ever since we, just exactly a year ago, realized that our rights in ways that we never would have envisioned will be trampled on by the Supreme Court of the United States of America. And so today is the grim anniversary of that date, the date of a shameful regression of women's rights in this country. And 1 year ago today, it was an unthinkable turning point when the Dobbs decision was actually leaked. And there was stunned silence among many of us. Can this really be what will happen in this great country? There was a sense of urgency, a sense of hope that maybe this leak would, and the outrage that was associated with this leak would convince the Supreme Court justices that what they would be doing would be setting back something we've always cherished in this country, known as progress and the rights of women. And the threats of a constitutionally protected right that we had taken for granted was actually under severe threat. And it's a right that the women of my mother's generation fought for, and that multiple generations since have come to understand as the law of the land, without dispute. But we saw what happened, that they did not listen to the pleas, the protests, the people saying, don't do this to the women of this country. They turned a deaf ear. And now the extremist far-right Supreme Court literally stripped away our fundamental rights by the end of last June, putting tens of millions of lives at risk. But little did we know, that was just the beginning. They weren't done yet. Just a few weeks ago, we saw a hard-line mega judge in Amarillo, Texas, issued an unprecedented decree banning medication that countless women have relied upon safely to terminate pregnancies or manage miscarriages, overruling the experts, doctors, the FDA, scientists. It was an attack on abortion and ultimately an attack on democracy. That was Texas. In Florida, a new 6-week ban on abortion just passed, severely inflicting intense suffering on millions of women, eliminating one of the few safe havens in the South where women could access care. And any woman would know, 6 weeks, you have no idea if you're pregnant after 6 weeks in so many cases. You just don't know. I would be in that category. So I speak for every one of us here today. We are sick and tired of judges and lawmakers telling us what to do with our bodies. And if there's one thing that New Yorkers will not do, ever, is stand by when we see wrong being done. Our state has, from the beginning, fought this great fight. Abortion was legal in New York 3 years before the rest of the nation, before Roe v. Wade was decided. And we're going to do everything in our power to stop the backslide while expanding reproductive rights here in our state. And I know that there are states where these battles are going to be waged, which is why I've taken action as governor to make sure that New York remains a sanctuary for anyone seeking reproductive care, that abortion remains safe, accessible, and legal in our state. The Dobbs decision and the aftermath were absolutely devastating, but we took that anger and turned it into action. At my direction, New York State funded $35 million immediately to help reproductive care centers and providers, knowing that there'll be a lot more demand, people coming to New York as a safe haven. Making sure that insurance companies in the state of New York now have to cover abortion services. They would stockpile the medication-inducing drugs like misoprostol. And we are one step closer to passing the Equal Rights Amendment, enshrining abortion rights in our Constitution. But it's not enough. There's more to do. That's why we're here today. Because we can't let the extremists on the other side know that we're stopping. We must meet this moment with tenacity and the leadership that's required. And that's why we're gathered. That's why we're going to talk about some legislation and try to be that model for other states of what we can do when the federal government and forces in Washington and other states go in a different direction. Contrary to the values on which this country was founded, we'll do it differently here in New York. In New York, we're going to continue to expand access. Today, we're signing 2 bills into law to make reproductive health care more accessible to those who need it all across the state. First, we're ensuring that every single student enrolled in a SUNY or CUNY college will be able to access medication abortion should they need it. College-age New Yorkers are more likely to require abortion care than any other age group in our state, but too often barriers stand between them and the resources they need. And think about this. A Gallup poll released today, saw it early this morning, found that 72% of college students say reproductive health is important, that the laws in the state will influence their decision whether to go to school there. 81% said they'd be more likely to enroll in a state that had access to reproductive health care. That's significant. That is very significant. And so this is what matters to college-age students. And with this bill, New York will be positioned to accommodate the health care needs of all of our students, and the students will be welcoming from other states. Students will be able to seek out and receive medication abortion on all the campuses. And for hundreds of thousands of young New Yorkers, this legislation will make the difference between an unwanted pregnancy and a future where they can decide what they want to do. And I commend Assemblymember Harvey Epstein and Senator Cordell Clear for their work on this bill. Let's give them another round of applause. And second, I'm proud that we're fulfilling a promise that I made in my State of the State address earlier this year, passing legislation so pharmacists can dispense contraception over the counter. This will dramatically increase birth control access for every New Yorker, but especially those in rural parts of our state or where there's marginalized groups and healthcare deserts, where they're far more likely to live closer to a pharmacy than to a doctor or a healthcare provider. And I want to thank Senator Stavisky and Assemblymember Paulin for leading the charge on this bill in the legislature. Let's give them a round of applause. These are landmark pieces of legislation, statements of our values as New Yorkers, and as always, when others fall short, New York will continue to step up and lead the way. Across the country, across the world, people are looking to New York for leadership during these tumultuous times. We lead with a strong belief in what is right, what is just, and what can be done to push back against the powerful forces of regression and repression that seek to strip the rights of our women. With these bills, we're standing up, we're fighting back, and we're welcoming all in search of these freedoms. There's more to do, but it begins in rooms like this today when we sign this important legislation into law. Thank you. And let me bring up someone who's not afraid to use the power of her office conferred upon her as the Attorney General of the state of New York. Tish James has been a champion her entire life in support of women's rights. And today she's able to join us with her reflections on what we're doing here, but also as a partner of mine as we lead the state forward in defense of women's freedoms. Attorney General Tish James.
Thank you, Governor Hochul, for your leadership today and over the past few months on this issue. I also want to thank my colleagues who are here and who have led this effort, Senator Stavitsky, Assemblymember Paulin, Senator Clear, and the man who is in the Men Who Get It Club. He's the chairperson, Assemblymember Epstein. It's great to see all of you. And of course, Rochelle Rodney, the Director of Advocacy for the New York Birth Control Access Project, and Nika Rika, I hope I said that correctly, Raul, the lead organizer of Reproductive Justice Collective of New York. We continue to see threats to our basic rights in other states and in the courts. And as the case of Hippocratic Medicine versus FDA, it's scheduled for oral arguments on May 17th before the Court of Appeals for the 5th District. It's more important than ever that New York take real action to protect and expand access to reproductive health care. And that's what we're doing today and every day, enacting and enforcing laws to protect people's basic right to their own decisions about their own bodies. The SUNY system serves more than 1.3 million students throughout the state, and we all know that many of the campuses are in rural areas where people might not otherwise have access to care, right, Assemblymember Leah Webb? But by ensuring that our students have access to medication abortion through their health centers or a local health care provider, we are providing them with the freedom that they deserve. And we know that medication abortion is safe and effective. In fact, it's been safe and effective for over 20 years. And the fact that one judge would substitute his own personal beliefs over science, over evidence, over law is unfortunate. Medication abortion, mifepristone, has been used by more than 5 million people over more than 20 years, and we will continue to do everything in our power to protect and expand access to it both on our SUNY campuses and statewide. But today we are going beyond protecting access to abortion. We are taking critical steps to also expand access to birth control and to make it easy as possible to get contraception, especially in the aftermath of last year's Supreme Court decision and the threats to medication abortion. We must make it easier for people to get birth control. And one common sense way to do that is by providing over-the-counter birth control and allowing pharmacists to prescribe it directly, because up to 1/3 of adult women in this country struggle to get access to hormonal birth control, many because they live in rural areas and cannot access a provider. This important measure will ensure that there is more safe and easy ways to access the contraceptives New Yorkers deserve to have at their disposal. But here in New York, we have forward-thinking leaders. Leaders not only in the state of New York, but individuals all across this nation look to, working to protect and advance access on reproductive health services. Elsewhere, there are elected officials and organizations working overtime to target basic contraception and abortion rights. But our state legislature obviously is standing up for women, standing up for progress, and standing up for freedom and democracy. We are not going to let the rights we fought so hard for to be stripped away. And I am committed as the Attorney General to providing safety, security, and privacy for anyone seeking or providing lawful reproductive health care options and using the law both as a sword and as a shield. All of the efforts that Governor Hochul and our legislature and I have been taking sends a clear message. Abortion is and will always be protected in the great state of New York. And all of us will do everything in our power to make it easier for people to make their own decisions about their own bodies. While other states are moving backwards, New York State is moving forward. Thank you, Governor Hochul, and our state legislature for the leadership you continue to show on this urgent issue. Together, we are continuing our tradition of progress and advancing rather than removing equal rights for all. It is my hope that we continue to be an example to the nation and a place of refuge and hope and freedom for anyone who needs it. Thank you.
Please welcome Rochelle Rodney, the Director of Advocacy for the New York Birth Control Access Project.
Hi, everyone. My name is Rochelle Rodney. I'm the Director of Advocacy at the New York Birth Control Access Project. And today is not just a win for reproductive health care access. Today is also speaking to the power of youth organizing. And growing up in East New York, Brooklyn, I did not have comprehensive education to sex education. And I took things into my own hands. I decided to join community organizations and to teach people within my community about sex ed and how to take care of themselves. My peers were so eager to drive this topic forward, and I've learned how to take care of myself throughout the process as well. But I also saw that and experienced from my first hands the barriers that people face to accessing contraception and sex education in general. Many of the advocates at NYBCAP have joined our organization because they have faced these barriers to accessing birth control themselves, and they want to work to eliminate them. Even if a doctor's appointment is scheduled 3 weeks in advance, it can also be difficult to find a time to fit into their schedules regardless of that appointment. Things come up, people have emergencies, and it can also delay the process of them getting the care that they need. For rural and low-income communities, these problems are magnified. We launched the Birth Control Access Project because the state, we've realized, has a lot of gaps to access, and we were willing to work to close them. And this is why, over the past year, we have been fighting for the Birth Control Access Act. This common sense legislation is an absolute game changer. And by making the pharmacy a one-stop shop for contraception, we have now given people the authority to walk into their pharmacies, get their prescription, and also get their birth control at the same time. Most people live closer to a pharmacy than they do their clinicians, and the Birth Control Access Act will dramatically expand access to contraception for young people. Instead of scheduling an appointment weeks in advance, the new law will allow them to stop by on their way home or on their way from school. Now, studies have shown that these efforts also meet the people that needs it the most exactly where they are, and that is people that will be prescribed birth control by their pharmacists, a lot of young people, shout out to the young people in the room, and they're also less likely to be insured. We'd like to thank Governor Hochul and Attorney General Tish James for being such an advocate for reproductive health. We'd also like to thank the sponsors of this bill, Senator Stavitsky and Assemblymember Pollen. Thank you for championing this bill. Assemblymember Pollen, you are among one of the first in the nation to introduce a bill like this, and now in New York, we will be able to get our prescription right at the pharmacy. Thank you for your leadership on this. While this bill represents a major win for reproductive rights for New Yorkers, it's not time to get comfortable. We still have more work to do, and we must continue to protect these rights of our New Yorkers' reproductive freedom, because the opponents have shown us time and time again that they will do anything to eviscerate these rights. If we want to succeed in achieving reproductive justice, we must let young people continue to lead this fight and give them a seat at this table. Thank you.
Please welcome Niharika Rao, the co-founder and lead organizer for Reproductive Justice Collective.
Hi everyone. I didn't realize fully cognizantly that it's the 1-year anniversary, and it just kind of hit me, all the work so many of you have done for the past year. So I'm a little emotional, but I will get through this. My name is Niharika Rao, and I speak today on behalf of the Reproductive Justice Collective of New York, a youth-led advocacy group fighting for reproductive access for all in New York State, and Advocates for Youth, a national organization working for youth sexual and reproductive access. Today marks a vital step in our 3-year-long campaign to increase access to medication abortion on New York campuses. We're so thankful to Governor Hochul, AG James, Assemblymember Harvey Epstein, and Senator Clear for being such champions of this legislation and supporting our grassroots youth advocacy efforts. Young people are constantly on the front lines of attacks on bodily autonomy, from access to contraception, gender-affirming care, and of course, abortion. We already faced increased barriers to abortion care, including travel, harassment, cost, insurance coverage, and greater stigmatization. This is despite the most common age for abortions being 18 to 24 years old, which is the college age range. And it is true even in New York, where legality does not necessarily translate to access without legislation like this, which ends the continual exceptionalization of basic care in our own backyard. Starting my first semester of college in New York, I joined a movement of young people fighting against these attacks and helping each other access care. We campaigned successfully for Barnard College at Columbia to become the first private college in the country to offer medication abortion care on campus. We trained as abortion doulas so we could provide peer support to each other in accessing abortion. In response to Roe being overturned last summer, we came together to organize with students and activists on the ground in restricted states and fundraise for folks to travel in New York to access abortions, offered up our homes so that young people from other states could come crash with us in case they needed reproductive care. 4 years into my journey as a graduating senior, I know that regardless of what federal courts or politicians try to say about access to medication abortion, try to say about young people's bodies, New York will champion our bodily autonomy, and young people will always have access to abortion care in New York. As an abortion doula, I've supported dozens of young people in New York who've had a medication abortion and told me how grateful they are that they can have an abortion while sitting in class, while engaging in their family responsibilities, and while hanging with their friends in their dorm. Medication abortion counts for more than 52% of all abortions in the United States, and as A.G. James mentioned, is one of the most overstudied, safe, and regulated drugs. Now that level of reproductive access will finally be extended to students across the state, aligning our state with recommendations from the scientific and medical community that they've been asking for over a decade. Thank you again so much to Governor Hochul and the legislators today for being such champions for youth reproductive access. I'm really grateful for everyone here. Thank you.
Now we will have our bill signing photo for the over-the-counter contraception bill signing.
If we can have you go behind the two senators behind in the middle.
Okay, good.
Take a couple minutes. I did this 840 times last year. You guys can slow down a little bit. Goodness, you have a short break. To do Kathleen a little more quickly, but I'll save that for a big event. Madam Attorney General.
Just for the okay.
Bill is signed.
Next.
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you all for staying on this date that'll remain in infamy, the day that the Dobbs decision was leaked 1 year ago and sent shockwaves throughout the nation. And we gathered here on this day to remind the rest of the country that in New York we're standing up for women's rights, and that includes making sure that medication abortions are available on college campuses, the SUNY and CUNY's schools, as well as making sure that there can be over-the-counter birth control pills available to the women of this state. So we signed those two bills into law, and those are just part of a long journey where we can find more ways to protect the rights of women in the state of New York. Any questions?
Yes, so I actually had a question about the budget, the climate change initiatives. Now, originally, when that report came out, there was going to be a ban on gas stoves by, I think, 2030, as I remember. And now that is not in there, right? I was just hoping you could clarify that, because I know there's so much misinformation out there. And what exactly is the future for people who want gas stoves or have them now? And also, is there anything in there to help ratepayers through this transition with buying new, energy-friendly appliances and heating systems?
The last part of your question pertains to the affordability surrounding the transition to a clean energy future, zero emissions. And so that's something I raised often during our budget negotiations, that while the climate laws enacted back in 2019 are bold and aggressive, and the CLCPA announced a path in December that I'm required as the governor to implement, I also want to make sure that people can afford it. So the Cap and Invest initiative that we put in our budget was a way to generate billions of dollars that would be allocated for a number of purposes, but the number one, in my opinion, was to be able to give rebates back to ratepayers to help them offset their costs, as well as purchasing the energy-efficient appliances. So what we put in motion in the budget was language that allows us, because we didn't have this power before, the ability to have rebates available. So when we get the Cap and Invest program, which will come later, I want to make sure that we also had the guarantee that we'd be able to give money back to New York, because that was important.
How soon would those rebates come?
We haven't felt the effect of it yet. So I needed to get the law changed to give us the mechanism to address that. So we have time. We have time to do that. But also on the question of the electrification of buildings, and also and I can get the exact details to you, but new buildings that are below 7 stories would have, correct me if I'm wrong here, below 7 stories would be required to have electric as the energy source starting in 2020. If I want to shout out the number, 2025, and above that height would be 2 years later, but all buildings would be electrified after 2030. So this is just new buildings. Again, I want to be very clear. I know people love to misinterpret this, but people with existing gas stoves, you're welcome to keep them, stay where you are, do what you please, and even the requirement that new buildings would have to be electrified. There are many exemptions in that for hospitals, making sure people have backup generators, certain congregate settings, restaurants, for chef's kitchens. So there's a lot of thought put into that as well. But this is where our nation has to go eventually. But I want to make sure that it's not a bumpy road to the transition, that we do it in a rolled out way, that people understand the need to do that, as well as making sure that we have money available to help offset the costs. But I can get you the precise details on the height of the buildings. There's a lot of details on that.
On your announcement today about allowing pharmacists to dispense contraception over the counter, two technical questions. One, what type of contraception are we talking about? Is it just birth control? And then also, can you clarify the over-the-counter part? Is that just giving pharmacists like privileges to, hand it out?
There's going to be a lot of rules that are coming out of it. This doesn't go into effect till next January. So we're going to take that time to work with the pharmacists to make sure they understand their responsibilities and identify the different types of birth control. Normally one would think of the pill as being the one that is now required to be administered and prescribed by a doctor. So that is transitioning to allow that to be available from pharmacists and to remove the barrier. I mean, so many of New Yorkers live in healthcare deserts. And as you heard from one of our speakers, trying to get an appointment and then waiting and then it gets canceled. And, a lot of people need these services, especially our college-age students. So, but there's a lot more detail that'll be unveiled during the regulatory process. And there'll be time for public comment during that as well.
Governor, were you aware of the room in the LOB operating as a daycare center? And could I get your thoughts on this?
Right. And this was a drop-in center, which has different standards than a all-day-long child care center or daycare center, as we so. This is something that there was communication from the assembly to our office, I think in the summertime, we put them in contact with the Office of Child and Family Services to let them know what the guidelines were if they did want a full-time stand-up daycare center and what they needed. So we've been aware. Yes, we've been aware.
Was there any sort of licensure that was needed for that,
That is what is being looked at now, but our understanding is there was not, because there's different requirements for a drop-in center versus a child care center. This is just a few hours a day when you just have sort of a situation, you don't have a babysitter. So I think that was the premise behind it, on what the assembly was looking to do.
Okay, Kate.
Governor, I know that the Senate included the Clean Slate Act in its budget proposal. Why didn't that get included in the final budget? And if it's passed as separate legislation this year, will you sign it, and why or why not?
We've been having very serious conversations about clean slate. We started with different views on when it would actually start, the wiping of the clean slate, and whether it's immediately upon release, or is it upon the end of probation? There's just some details, but we are working toward the completion of that to get it done during the session.
Do you support it?
Yes.
Then? You support
I
that?
support what we've been working to achieve, and we're still working on language.
Governor, in the new bail proposal, it appears that the least restrictive means was also removed for non-monetary conditions, which would be set for non-serious, well, not non-serious, but non-violent and misdemeanor crimes. You had promised that the least restrictive means would only be removed for the most serious crimes. Is that a change?
Now, what we're looking to give is the courts more autonomy in deciding the conditions and the kind and degree of control that is necessary to return someone to court. But I want to make sure we do, and this is what was not happening. We weren't having people being sent to programs that could help them rehabilitate. In the past, when we went before a judge, instead of having an automatic remaining outside the system based on the crime you committed, that people weren't getting the help they needed. They weren't being sent to substance abuse programs. They weren't being sent to anger management programs. They weren't getting that kind of support. So by allowing an individual to go before a judge, the judge can now look at different factors. Are there ways to have electronic monitoring? So we've opened it up. There's a lot of discussion about this. And what we've opened it up is for the ability for a judge to look at the entirety of the picture of the individual. And there may be ways that this person, if they're not detained or paying bail, that they actually can get services available to them.
So just to be clear then, the least restrictive means language has been removed for
All offenses. All offenses. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Governor, on the issue of charters, I understand that there has been talk about potentially in the post-budget session getting accountability measures and also looking at making sure these new charters go to minority-led schools. So if you can talk about, your thoughts on that, and if this is something that can be done this session, are you open to that?
Well, certainly there are a lot of discussions around charters, many days of discussions around charters. And what I set out to do was to not remove the cap, but have the entire state fall within the cap of 460. But, we negotiated and compromised, and we were told there would absolutely be no zombies, any form of charters allowed. And we were able to get 22 of the zombies previously licensed but had been shut down that, in my opinion, should be allowed within the cap. So there's a lot of discussion about, there was discussion about various, what could be considered poison pills and things that were intended to thwart the opening of these schools, which I was not interested in. And so now the legislature has the ability to have discussions again, talk about what they want to do, and I'll certainly be looking at what they come up with. But my objective was to respond to the pleas of countless black and brown parents who I met with, and the clergy I met with, and all the individuals who are just saying, we have 50,000 kids on wait lists in New York City, and I couldn't go back to them and say that I didn't try to get more schools open for them. So I want to make sure that we're not doing something that will ultimately thwart the opening, create disincentives, because then otherwise what was accomplished?
Are you open to accountability? I know there was 22 that are closed because there were issues. So there are a lot of advocates in the anti-charter movement that say there needs to be accountability and transparency with the way charters are run.
And if you look at sometimes how those good-sounding words were used, it was basically ways to make sure that they never opened as well. So you have to find the right balance. You want to do the right thing, make sure that the kids are getting quality education, but also not do everything you can to thwart the opening of these schools, which was, some people have that intention.
Okay, Zach and then Elise.
Governor, you worked with political consultant Adam Sullivan for quite a few campaigns. To what extent in any of them were you aware of him engaging in any behavior that could be described with campaign subordinates that could be described as bullying, demeaning, harassing, or otherwise unprofessional? And if not, what does that say about your oversight of the campaigns?
I think it says that my interaction with him was one-on-one, and when I did see him, he managed a 2011 campaign for me. I think everyone who worked with him thought that he was the elder in the room. He's about 30 years old, and there's a lot of young people that really looked to him as a leader. What has happened since then, I've not seen him interact with staff because, that's just a different dynamic. But so I was very disappointed to read what I saw in the newspaper, and since that time, we've parted ways.
But before the Times report came out, you weren't aware of any questionable behavior in any of the campaigns?
None.
Elise?
Governor, how do you feel the budget passing process has gone so far this week, and how do you anticipate it going through in the next weeks?
When I stood here last Thursday, I believe it was, and said we had a conceptual agreement, I knew that the paths would be as it is exactly playing out right now, that they're passing the bills. They want, states of the night, work hard, and, basically alleviate the need to have an additional extender. So it's exactly as we thought, because I had been in constant communication with the leaders, even up to an hour before I came out and spoke to all of you. And yes, we're almost done. It's nearing its completion. And I think when New Yorkers look back, they don't care so much about the time element involved, because that time element gave me the necessary time to really get signature bills and ideas over the finish line. And you look at what we accomplished with bail and what we did with the charters, but also I wanted to make sure that we had support for families, the 0 to 4 tax break for the first time ever. That's going to be so important. Raising the minimum wage. So there's a lot of negotiation even to what the numbers were, but we got so much accomplished. I'm proud of the mental health initiatives, proud of our investment in education. So this all came together, and it is a strong, strong package to help New Yorkers deal with affordability and public safety.
Yeah.
There's going to be about a month left of scheduled session.
I couldn't hear the first part of the question.
There'll be about a month left of scheduled session after this budget passes, if it passes this week. What will be your priorities?
We're going to start talking about housing again. I had the conversations with the leaders about, the time that they want now to let others digest the scale of the initiatives I proposed, that I put on the table, that I believe are necessary. We need to go big. We need to be bold and ambitious in what we're trying to do to solve the affordability crisis, because we're going to lose too many New Yorkers, And young families won't be able to stay here, employers won't have the employees they need, seniors won't be able to downsize and live in homes in the community where they raise their own kids. So we have to act with urgency. So the conversations will start in earnest immediately. That'll be one of my top priorities. I don't know what will be accomplished in a session, but while the legislators are here, it gives us a chance to have the conversations, and I'll be looking toward more initiatives certainly in my next budget.
Last question, Dan.
I have two very different questions for you. I apologize. The first one, just in these states that are restricting and banning abortion across the country, a lot of them are also restricting or banning gender-affirming care for transgender children. I'm wondering how you feel about that, and if the state will step up for those children and families in the same ways that they've stepped up.
I say leave our kids alone. Leave our kids alone. They're under enough stress. They don't need to have a government that spends its waking days trying to take away their rights and make them feel inferior that they're different. That's abhorrent what they're doing. They have enough to do. They have other states to run. I know the responsibilities. Leave the kids alone.
Just a second, kind of just jumping off the panel. So you would like to see if you can get housing done by the end of this session rather than picking it up fresh next session?
Well, by the end of the session, I just described what I would say. The next time I have the ability to put forth my policies will be in the next budget. But people said they wanted time for education, time to build more advocacy. I will tell you that the plan we put forth, to build that many houses over a decade, do we expect to get it all through in the first 3 months of announcing it? No, but it started the conversation. It sparked a lot of debate. And what that does is it starts getting us to a place. All significant movements throughout our history have taken time. This is a movement that is long overdue to recognize that people have a right to live in all communities, that there are rights that go along with being a New Yorker, and it says you should be able to find a home that you can afford to pay the rent or pay the mortgage. And that right is so far out of reach for so many New Yorkers, that's untenable. So that is going to be my commitment throughout my entire duration as governor.
All right, thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
You coming to the LCA show?
I've been rehearsing on all my spare time over the last 2 months. No, I will be there. I'll be there. And if I show up, and I show up on time, that means you all have to take it easy on me, okay? Thank you.